Hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. How you guys doing? Pretty good. Pretty good. A little tired. A little tired. I was up late last night. Reading through debate stuff. That was some show last night. Ooh. We won't talk about that in this class. Instead, we'll talk about another conversation where somebody acts like a bully. Today we're going to be talking about Republic, and the big thing under discussion in Republic is justice, which I don't know about you guys. I'm excited. We've been hearing about it for a while. We've been here. Apparently, piety was a kind of justice. That was somehow the key to what piety was. And then virtue apparently had something to do with justice as well, although it's not exactly the same thing as justice, Socrates points out. So this could very well be like a really big key to a lot of the other concepts that we've been looking at. Also because Republic, I don't know if I've really communicated it just yet. I'm a big Plato fan. I really like the way this guy works. It's impressive. The way that he just like weaves layer upon layer of performative irony and all kinds of other things. It's just, it rewards the person who comes back to the text over and over and over again. You're always finding new stuff. They're more than texts. They're conversational partners. And I really like that about Plato. He's an impressive writer. Nowhere is this more on clear display than in Republic. Republic is a long, long dialogue. We're only going to read just a little bit of it, just some little snippets. We're going to look through books 1 and the beginning of book 2 today. And then we're going to pull away and look at Apology and Credo and Phaedo, and then we'll come back to Republic again. Some later sections. But it's a long dialogue. As a matter of fact, it's so long that the conversation that's being described in the dialogue is one that takes an entire day. It starts in the morning and it ends at night. And if you were ever to actually, this is kind of something I was mentioning, I alluded to just a second ago, Omar, is if you actually sit down and read it out loud, if you were to perform, like get some friends together and perform it, which when I was an undergrad, the Philosophy Club did this. They would do public performances of the Republic once a year. Yeah, and you could just kind of like swing it, like people would rotate in and out. If you perform the Republic in its entirety, it takes about 12 hours. It goes from like morning to night. And there are like little places in the dialogue where they check in where like, in not the least of which is a passage in the middle where they're talking about shadows, where there are like real analogs to what's going on during the day. For instance, in the conversation about shadows, there are shadows, and then by the time they get to the end of that conversation about shadows, and they're talking about, instead of looking at the hazy reflections of things as they really are, let's look at the things as they really are and not pay attention to the shadows and reflections and other kinds of icons. It's noon, and all the shadows have gone away. Really amazing stuff going on in Republic. We'll get just a little bit of a taste of it today. There were some hands. I didn't mean to steamroll them. Yes?
Do you think with the way that Plato has been setting up these topics of like piety and then virtue, like being parts of justice but not fully describing justice, are by design? Because I know that the way his writings are, like they're spread out, and like even he was like, okay, first he's gonna write about virtue and then piety and then finally justice.
Yeah, hard to say. That would be impressive indeed, right? If it wasn't just within each dialogue that he's crafting these kind of very carefully woven, like holding back, not exactly saying what he means to say and leaving it to be discovered. If he's also doing this from dialogue to dialogue, like across different dialogues, that would be even more impressive. There's a part of me that would say like, nah, nobody's that careful. But like, I don't know. Plato's boss.
And this one's like, he's actually offering an answer.
Yeah. So let's get to brass tacks with Republic already. A couple of things that are probably worth pointing out that are very, very different than anything that we've seen so far. Most notably, I think, is who's the narrator in this? We haven't seen that before, have we? It opens up with, I went down to the Piraeus yesterday. Yeah, so that's a kind of an interesting little quirk. We're hearing from Socrates himself. Some folks take this to indicate that we're starting to get some shades of Plato himself. I think those aren't really going to be found in the opening books that we're looking at today. I think the places where Plato starts speaking for himself are later on in the dialogue, more like books 5 and 6. But yeah, so that's something worth kind of noticing, that like in the other dialogues that we've read, Socrates isn't the narrator, now Socrates is the narrator. So that's interesting. Another thing that's interesting about this dialogue is that it doesn't take place in Athens. Very few dialogues do that. They're not in Athens, they're at Piraeus, which if you guys all remember when I was talking about brief history of Athens stuff, Piraeus is the port city that is like down the walled up road, all the way down to the ocean from Athens. So it's a little bit ways away. There's a big festival there, and Socrates goes down to Piraeus for the festival, and he's about to turn around, head right back to Athens, and he gets waylaid by a friend. So let's jump right in here, right? Introduction, where we know all the good stuff happens. We get this kind of little, how would we call them? Foreshadowings of all the major themes of the dialogue. So in the introduction to Republic, Socrates, he went down to Piraeus, and he gets held up. Who holds him up? Polemarchus, yeah, Polemarchus and some of his friends. And it might seem a little bit confrontational, but I don't know, how did you guys read it? Did you read it as confrontational? Did you read it as playful?
It's
Playful?
Yeah, it's playful. They're friends.
It's like hospitable. It's like you have to come over.
Yeah, for sure. There's totally an element of hospitality going on there, where Polemarchus says like, "Hey, it looks like you're going back to Athens," and Socrates says, "Well, then it looks the way that it is, because I am going back to Athens." Also, no chuckles. Not just a funny joke. Thanks. Not just a funny joke, but also like there we go. There's a theme right off the bat.
I didn't notice that.
It's not where we've drawn attention to this idea of a relationship between the way things seem and the way that they actually are. We're not going to get a whole lot of this in books 1 and 2, but this is going to come up in the later books that we read. The difference between how things seem and the way that they actually are. So, it seems like you're going back to Athens. Well, then it seems the way that it is. And Polemarchus says, what does he say? Polemarchus wants him to stay. He says, you should stay. And Socrates is like, I like the city. It makes him a little bit anxious to not be in Athens. And he's like, I really want to go back. And Polemarchus says, okay, I'll take it. Polemarchus says, well, look how many more of us there are of you. You're going to have to either power us. Did I say power? You're going to have to either overpower us, or you're going to have to do what we say. And Socrates says, did you guys read it? Do you have the text with you in class? Why don't you go ahead and pull it out?
Where
The very beginning. Unless, am I mistaken? Does Bear just completely cut this out? I don't think so.
Starts talking about
327c.
we don't have that.
A minute later, Polemarchus joined us with Glaucon's brother Adamantus and Maceridas, the son of Nicias, and some others who must have been at the procession. Glaucon and Adamantus, by the way, they're going to make a reappearance at the end of Book 1, beginning of Book 2. Glaucon and Adamantus, if you don't know, and if this wasn't mentioned in Baird's footnotes, are Plato's brothers. So these are kind of special characters. His older brothers. Plato is the younger brother of Glaucon and Adamantus. Socrates, says Polemarchus, I do believe you're starting back to town and leaving us. You've guessed right, I answered. Well, he said, you see what a large party we are. I do. Unless you're more than a match for us, then you must stay here. Isn't there another alternative? Socrates says. What's the other alternative?
You must let us go. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have that.
No way!
Yes.
It starts with and then.
Yeah.
What a tragedy! Okay, some of the early stuff in this lecture is going to be stuff I haven't read yet. Ooh, ooh. Were there any quiz questions on the stuff before 336? Thank goodness.
No.
That's what I get for holding on to the old edition. Okay, all right. Socrates says, isn't there an alternative?
We can persuade you to let us go.
Yeah, yep, thanks. Somebody found it on the internet. These are public domain, by the way.
Yeah.
Or I could persuade you. And Polemachus playfully says, how could you persuade us if we won't listen?
Downward word of the cave.
So yeah, we might have some shades of Allegory of the Cave already. I think we've already got this little exchange is, I think this is directly relevant to what's going on in Book 1. You'll have to overpower us or do what we say. Or I could persuade you. Yes, but how could you persuade us if we don't listen? First of all, just a very kind of, I don't know about you guys, the sort of thing that I immediately identify with. You can make arguments, but if people don't listen, not really going to do much good, right? And we've even had some folks in this class articulate a kind of perhaps a pessimism about how likely it is that philosophical conversation could actually change people's minds. And it's totally right. If they don't listen, it won't work. You can't persuade anybody if they won't listen. We have this interchange that kind of articulates the difference between power, like the power of kind of like violent strength, right? And the power of persuasion, and what the possible limits of the power of persuasion might be. We're going to get an interlocutor for Socrates who doesn't really seem all that interested in listening to him. And we have this big question. Well, how's Socrates going to persuade him if he won't listen? Spoiler alert, the way to get somebody who won't listen to talk to you is to let them talk. That's how it ends up working. He busts the Elenchus out on him. All right, so I went down the Piraeus, you'll have to blah, 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 all this stuff. So these are introductions of major themes that we're getting already in the introduction. They go back to Polemachus' house. This also is before 336, so not in your book. That's a bummer. They go back to Polemachus' house where Socrates meets up with Cephalus, yes, Polemachus' father. So Cephalus and Polemachus. I can't believe Baird cut this out. This is criminal. This might be the end of this book for this class. So Cephalus is Polemachus' father, and Polemachus kind of drops him off. As Socrates is coming in, Cephalus is like, Socrates, you don't come around as often as you really should. Come, sit, talk with me. And Socrates says, like, good, I love to sit and talk with older folks. After all, they're people who have like traveled a road already that we too are going to have to travel someday. So tell me, Cephalus, how's old age going for you? A lot of people complain about old age. They say it's a real bummer. And Cephalus says, not so bad for me. I'm actually enjoying it. I too have heard people who complain about old age and say that it's no good. But yeah, frankly, I don't get it. And Socrates says, you know, some people might say that the reason why old age is so easy for you is because you're rich. And Cephalus says, yeah, there might be something to that. There totally might be something to that. Then he says, this reminds me a little bit about, you know, a famous Athenian and noble Athenian who it was said, like, you wouldn't be all that famous if you weren't from Athens. And the guy says back to the other guy, yeah, that might be true, but if you were from Athens, you probably wouldn't be famous. So it's the sort of thing. And Cephalus says the same thing about money. He says, yeah, you're probably right. The money helps. But a lot of the people who complain about old age, my sense is even if they had money, they still wouldn't be happy. They wouldn't enjoy themselves. Socrates and Cephalus get into a really fascinating conversation that I was expecting to have with you guys today, and sure, why not? even though you haven't read it because Forrest E. Baird cut it out of our book. Socrates asked Cephalus, what is money good for? What is it that you can do with, like a lot of people seem to want to get money. Do you want money?
Yes.
Yes. Why? What do you do with money?
Buy
You
stuff.
spend
that I
it, you
like.
buy stuff. Is this stuff going to make you happy?
Yes. Yes. It does.
What the popular argument is, I'd rather cry in a mansion than cry on the street.
Rather cry in a mansion than cry on the street. Rather not cry at all, to be honest with you.
Yes.
Is the money going to help me not cry?
Sometimes.
You can use it as tissue.
All very funny stuff. Seriously, we spend an inordinate amount of our time and energy pursuing wealth. Why do we do it? And sometimes we pursue it to like what might arguably be excess. Is there such a thing as excess wealth? Can you have too much money?
Yes.
Too much money in the sense that it prevents you from being happy.
Yes.
Like, is this what like Biggie says? More money, no problems?
Yeah, pretty much.
I say no. But you can put forth far too much effort acquiring it.
You can put too much effort into getting money, but you can't get too much money. That's possible. What do you guys think?
Just
Or do we think like, no money, no problems, no matter how you get it?
Yeah.
In fact, we might talk about people. Here's an example of somebody who puts almost no effort into getting lots and lots of money. People who win the lottery. Anybody ever seen any of the profiles on people that win the lottery? Newsflash, they ain't happy. Most of them are miserable and wish they'd never won the money. To which some of us might say, like, very well, then give it to me.
Yeah. I think like if you have more money, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're less happy. It's just like he was saying, the means to acquire, how easy it is to get it, because like
Yeah, money itself isn't good, right? It's a means to an end.
Yeah, but like with a drug addict, like if you have an unlimited supply of heroin,
Yeah.
then you're not gonna deal with the bad things, because you're never gonna have to like try to get it. You just have it.
Then again, you might not have to do bad things to get the heroin.
That's true.
Hmm.
But I mean, like it doesn't make it. You don't have to put.
But yeah, perhaps we might say, like, it depends on what you spend the money on, right? So yeah, this is maybe even kind of familiar territory. We saw some shades of this in Meno as well. This question of desiring beautiful things and having the power to acquire them. Yep.
I think it's two big problems that comes up when you have a lot of money. One of them is, a lot of people start expecting things from you, like start guilt tripping you. Oh, why don't you do all these things for these people who need it? And as opposed to a person who doesn't have all that money, you're just kind of like, yeah, he didn't have any money, he can't help us. Also,
So people bother you when you have money. They want you to give the money to them.
Yeah, and you also have to deal with fake people. You know, the occasional uncle that just kind of comes out of nowhere when he hears that you got a...
I don't know that because I've never had lots of money, but yeah, I can imagine.
So you have to deal with that. Fake people that, I guess, like acquaintances that just kind of come out of the woodworks.
Yeah, okay.
And another thing, I had another one. I had it on the tip of my tongue, and I can't think of it.
Well, if you think about it again, let me know.
Yeah.
There's this question of what money is good for, and Cephalus ends up giving an answer. And it's actually a pretty profound answer. It's a fairly wise answer. It's one of those answers that, like, if I was talking to my wealthy grandfather and he said this, I might write it down in my notebook. He says, money is good because it helps you to be a better person. And what he means by this is, if you have no money at all, there is an incredible temptation, maybe even something that we might call a coercion, to do things like lie, cheat, and steal. If you have your back up against the wall so badly that you don't know if you're going to be able to feed yourself, it's very, very difficult to be just. Relatively easy to be just. Cephalus says, it's easier to tell the truth and pay one's debts and he kind of sprinkles a little bit of Greek theology on top of it and says, like, this way, now that I'm old, I'm not worried that like I'm going to have to pay a bigger debt when I go to the underworld. I'm not worried if we might take it in a kind of like a more contemporary religious sort of register. I'm not worried about my eternal fate and whether or not, you know, things are going to kind of go bad for me in the afterlife, because I know that I told the truth. I will always tell the truth, and I kept my promises, and I paid my debts. I'm not going to leave this world with any debts left behind. And it was relatively easy to do that because I had money, because I never really had my back up against the wall. And this is a really interesting claim. It almost seems like we're saying, like, it's harder for poor people to, like, tell the truth and pay their debts, right? It's harder for poor people to live a just life. And that seems like it might be a little bit of a knock on the character of poor people, but on reflection, it does seem like there's some moral hazard that comes along with being not just like not as rich as some folks, but being like seriously broke. Seriously broke where you feel like you have no choices but to do dishonest things. Yes?
It kind of seems like the difference between like white collar and blue collar crime, because it sounds like he's talking about like they'll lie and cheat and steal, which is like okay, but people with lots of money do other things that get just kind of grazed over. They don't really.
This is true, and we'll come back to Kephalus and what he said to the other guy as well, that like just because you have money, by the way, doesn't mean you're going to be just. It just means that you don't really have too many excuses for not being just. And this is justice, after all. Kephalus offers up, he says, this is what justice is. It's telling the truth, and it's paying one's debts. And Socrates says, that's interesting. So are you telling me, and Socrates goes into Elenchus mode with Kephalus here. He says, are you telling me that if like you had a neighbor who asked you to like hold on to your, no, if you had a neighbor who asked you to hold on to his weapons and came back one day and was in a murderous rage and said, give me back the weapons, I'm going to go kill somebody. They're his weapons. To keep your promise and to pay one's debts is to give them back to you. Is this the just thing to do, to give the guy his weapons back? And Kephalus says, I'm too old for this shit.
Marty's my son.
Yeah, and he said, yeah, and he says, like, I gotta go tend to the preparations for the feast, but I'll hand the conversation off to my son. He's gonna inherit the conversation, just like he's gonna inherit everything else from me. And Polemachus, to a certain extent, inherits the definition of justice that Kephalus hands down to him too, which is this is something that came up a little bit when we were talking about Euthyphro as well. Like, we do inherit a lot of our moral principles. A lot of our sense of like what justice and other things are from our parents. And Polemachus does what most of us do with these principles when we inherit them from our parents. He puts a tiny little spin on it. And he says, like, I'm going to make it just a little bit different. Polemachus says, justice is giving people what they're owed. And obviously, the really difficult part in this is this question of, like, what is it that people are owed, right? Justice is giving people what they're owed, and Socrates is like, yes, but what are they owed? And Polemachus says, easy. Benefits to our friends and harm to our enemies. What do you think? Sound like justice? Benefits to our friends, harm to our enemies. And Socrates says, wait, what do you mean by friends and enemies? We're going to talk about our real friends and our real enemies, or just the people that we think are friends or we think are enemies? The ones who seem like friends and seem like enemies. There's that being and seeming distinction. Which are we talking about? Polemachus, of course, like who's going to say just the ones who seem like friends, right? He says, our real friends and our real enemies. Socrates says, who are our real friends and who are our real enemies? Do you mean to say that good people are our real friends and bad people are our real enemies? And Polemachus is like, by Zeus, Socrates, of course, how could it be otherwise? And Socrates says, that's what I thought you might have said. How does this sound now? Does that sound like justice? Good things to good people, bad things to bad people. Some folks shaking their heads. Some folks like, yes.
But what constitutes a good and a bad person?
Oh, that's a conversation for another day. But let's say that we could reliably distinguish between good people and bad people. And if it makes you feel any better, we'll just toss out a couple of very obvious examples, right? Yeah, like Hitler, right? Bad guy. He deserves harm. Good people. Gandhi deserves benefits. We might even think about this as like the cosmic justice that's on offer in the afterlife, right? Good people, what do they get? Heaven. It's very nice, I hear. Bad people, what do they get?
Oh.
Yeah, the other place, which I hear is not very nice. Benefits to good people, harms to bad people. That's justice. And Socrates says, you're going to harm the bad people? They're already bad. Doesn't harm make people worse? Aren't the bad people the last people that we want to harm? If anybody needs benefits, it's the bad people to make them better. What do you think about that? Harm them until they're good? This is a peculiar brand of harm that makes people better. Are you thinking of punishment? Is that what you're thinking about? Punishment is what we give to people who do bad things, people who do the wrong things. We give them punishments to make them better.
You should like
But it like makes them mad at you, so.
Makes them mad at you? Maybe, yeah. So what we've got here is a difference between Socrates' questions as harm to enemies part. That's the last people that we want to harm. We want to make the bad people better. We want to make our enemies better. And so shouldn't we be benefiting them? And now there's this question of like punishment, right? And this exposes a big, these aren't the only kinds of justice that have to do with punishment, a big difference of opinion or difference of intuitions that have to do with just punishment. Are we talking about a retributive sense of punishment, just punishments, or justice, a retributive sense of justice? Are we talking about a rehabilitative? When somebody gets punished, what's our aim? Is our aim to harm them, or is our aim to make them better?
Make them better.
Always? Yes.
When you look at let's just use like the American legal system as an example. A lot of times they'll have policies that are aimed to deter criminals from doing certain actions, and so those are more retributive, where like the death penalty. Well, the death penalty can deter people from not doing that action. And other times, some people will talk about making sure that the prisoners who are in prison can become good members of society again. So in those instances,
That would be rehabilitative.
Yeah, the goal is, I mean, not necessarily practice of what they do, but
Yes.
yeah.
So yeah, ostensibly the goal, right? And deterrence is actually, that's a different thing altogether. Retribution isn't necessarily about deterrence, because something like the death penalty, we might trot out statistics and show like, it doesn't really work as a deterrent at all, or there's no evidence that it works as a deterrent at all. And some folks would still have a very strong intuition, like some of you might even be in the room, a very strong intuition, that if you callously murder a large number of people and show no regret for it, you deserve to die. And it has nothing to do with deterring other people from doing it. It has nothing to do with making you better, because how on earth are you going to make somebody better by killing them? It has to do with eye for an eye, right? It has to do with retribution. You deserve it. You did bad things, so now bad things need to be done to you. This is the sort of thing that we're not going to spend a whole lot of time thinking about it right now, because this isn't a class on punishment and justice, although that would be a really cool class. But I think it's an important thing to think about, and you would be shocked how many people at very, very high levels of administrative authority, like I've caught in these sorts of conversations where they're talking about, like, for example, an academic judiciary hearing, where somebody is plagiarized, and the person next to me is saying, like, well, we have to make the punishment really hurt. And I'm like, why? Why are you trying to hurt the student? Aren't you trying to help the student? What is this bizarre activity that we're engaged in that tries to harm students? No, this is no good. We need to make sure that we're helping them. That would be if we're taking a rehabilitative approach, right? As opposed to a retributive approach. This comes up in political conversations as well. Every time you hear somebody talk about giving prisoners opportunities so that they can become better and more productive members of society, you hear somebody say, whoa, but we don't want to coddle them, right? We don't want jail to be a nice place. You think you're going to make people... What do we think of the prison system? Do people get better when they go into it? So
Very rarely.
if rehabilitation was our goal, we're not doing a very good job typically. There are some folks who like have some time to reflect and they come to Jesus. There are like a lot of other folks who like they go to jail and they come out worse. That's a problem. If we have a rehabilitative approach to justice. If we have a retributive approach to justice, then yeah, harm for harm, right? Yeah.
I don't think rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation.
There we go. I don't think that's the goal though when it comes to like prison.
You don't think it is the goal, or you don't think it should be the goal?
I don't think it is the goal, and the reason why is because I think the main goal is to somewhat stop them from committing future crimes. It's not necessarily there to help them become a better person.
Isn't that like part of making somebody a better person? Get them to not commit crimes?
Are you a bad person if you commit crimes?
You're doing bad things if you commit crimes. If the crimes are like violations of just laws, then yeah, you're doing unjust things. I don't know if that's enough to make you a bad person,
Yeah.
but it might be enough to say that your character needs fixing. If you demonstrate a persistent tendency to do unjust things, I think we're starting to get into the territory where we say you are an unjust person or you have unjust character or something like that. And this is not to say that it's unfixable, that will never change you necessarily, but that something would need fixing. This is if we think that people can change again, right? If we think that people can't change, once an evildoer, always an evildoer, then sure, maybe there's no point to rehabilitation. We'll say it's impossible. Yep.
So I've got like several speeding tickets, so am I like an unjust person or?
You probably, if there was a scale, you're not at the very, very like extreme of
But I
injustice.
still am unjust?
Do you think that the speed limit is a just law?
No.
Bruh.
It's a
Not a blast.
recommendation.
It's a recommendation?
Yes. Well,
Uh,
it's like.
the reason we know it's not a recommendation is you got tickets.
I mean,
It's the
obviously
limit.
it's not an actual recommendation, but it should be.
Okay.
Or like within a 5, like, you know, like you can go 5 fast.
We'll see this in Apology and Credo. There might be some room for like the willful breaking of unjust laws.
That's
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Because I knew I was speeding. I'm not trying to not.
Yeah. Unjust law is no law at all, right? So said Martin Luther King and a couple of other folks before him. Yeah, St. Augustine said that as well. That's where King got it from. But yeah, if your violation of the speeding laws is a protest against the unjustness of those speeding laws, then maybe more power to you. I'd be inclined to not be part of your protest because I happen to think that driving too fast is really dangerous, not just for you, but for everybody. Yeah.
So wasn't this dialogue 2,500 years ago?
Yes.
Did you say something about wondering, when we started the class in August, did you say something about some of these could be very relevant today?
Oh yes.
Funny how that works out.
Yeah, it is funny how that works, right? Yeah, like why study ancient philosophy, right? It's all old stuff. Nobody cares about justice today. Or the confusion between retribution and rehabilitation. Or this kind of bizarre tendency to somehow want to harm folks who do bad things. As if that's going to make them better? Yeah. So here's, yeah, for sure, totally relevant to our conversation today. Socrates, through his cross-examination of Polemachus, gets Polemachus to come around and say, like, it's giving people what they're owed. And what are they owed? Benefits to our friends, and what to our enemies?
Harm.
No.
Oh.
And benefits to our enemies. Benefits to everybody. That's justice. Justice is what gives everybody what they need. It's what gives benefits to everybody. Now, benefits might be different, and we might be thinking to yourself, like, whoa, are we going to reward people for breaking the law? Are we going to reward people for doing unjust things? No, not necessarily. We're going to give them something that's going to make them better. This is what a benefit is, something that makes you better. Think about the ways that parents punish their children. Do they do it to harm them? Do they sometimes say things that we don't believe as children, but like, yeah, maybe we think that they believe it? Things like, this is for your own good.
Yeah.
This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you.
I think it's good.
That might be a better model for punishment. Think about the way that what does a loving punishment do? Tries to make you better, right? It's a benefit for somebody who needs correction. And by the way, if we're kind of curious about like, yeah, that's weird, maybe we should talk about, this kind of strange ambiguity between things that seem harmful but are really beneficial. I'll remind you, we've been talking about this in every dialogue so far, right? Every single interlocutor claims that Socrates is harming them. And Socrates says, am I? Am I really harming you? By making you confused? Or is this in fact a benefit? Come on.
I guess an example would be like my mom, when I was in 4th grade, I stopped doing my homework. And so she was like, well, you can't play with your DS, Nintendo DS anymore, and you're going to have to start reading more books, like chapter books and stuff. And so for her doing that, I was like, no. But that kind of started my journey in like reading a lot. And like if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have liked reading as much as I do now. And
Perhaps
so,
a good punishment? Perhaps a
Yeah.
benefit,
it's
right?
like, it benefited me.
Seemed like a harm at the time.
Yeah, on the time it was like the end of the world for me.
Yeah.
But in the long run, it set me on a good path.
It's like medicine, right? Doesn't taste good, but it's good for you. Yep. Justin. Ah, but it's been cut out of your book. Because you guessed? All right, I'll be attentive to that. Yeah, I'll go through and I'll make sure that I count all answers correct. Yes. By the way, if something like that happens again, if you're just like he's asking a question that's not in the text, shoot me an email. Let me know. I can fix it before it becomes a bigger problem. Yeah.
Moving back to benefits, I'm not really sure what you mean by beneficial to the criminal to make them a better person. Is it beneficial to them or is it beneficial for them?
You mean, does it seem beneficial to them or is it beneficial for them?
Yeah.
It is beneficial for them. That's what I mean.
Beneficial for them?
Yeah.
Then how do we know that's still going to make them a better person if it's beneficial for them?
Because that's what a benefit is. It's something that makes you better. Just using words according to what they mean, right? What a benefit is something that makes you better.
Something that makes you better, but how do we know that they're actually going to use it?
Well, if it doesn't actually make them better, then it only seemed like a benefit, and it wasn't a real benefit. Trying to sort out exactly what the real benefits are from the things that only seem benefits, that's a tough job. We're not tackling that right now. We're merely trying to, is it relatively uncontroversial that first we should try to figure out what we're aiming for before we try to figure out how to hit it? Okay, fair enough. What we're aiming for, according to Socrates and Polemachus, is justice. And what is justice? It's giving people what they're owed. And what are people owed? Everybody is owed benefits. Everybody is going to be owed whatever makes them better. Justice is to the benefit of everybody. And justice harms no one. Seemingly a very bold claim. But maybe, I don't know, on further inspection, maybe not all that bold. Yeah.
If justice doesn't hurt anyone, but there are some cases where there are two sides opposing each other, and one believes that justice is one thing, one believes justice is another, and then whichever side thinks that when they make the justice happen or whatever to the other side, that would harm. I don't know. It just seems like.
If the side that's seeking justice wants to harm the other side, then I've got questions about whether or not they're really seeking justice, or if they're just seeking retributive satisfaction or something like that.
That's true.
And I don't know that that's going to make them any better.
Yeah, I was just thinking if both sides thought that they were the ones seeking justice, but their justice was different, and that it clashed.
Yeah.
Then
perhaps what we have is differences of opinion about exactly what's going to constitute a benefit and what's going to constitute a harm. Or perhaps we have differences of opinion about whether or not everybody's owed benefits in justice, right? In which case, we may very well say, and I think Polemachus and Socrates would say this, those people have justice wrong. The folks who are upset by justice that tries to benefit everybody and that want to insist that somebody be harmed in justice. Polemachus and Socrates, in fact, they say it together. They say, we'll band together and we'll fight against anybody who says otherwise. And this brings us to 336, where Thrasymachus, crouched like a tiger in the tall grass, Socrates spots him and he says, and then I saw Thrasymachus just coiled up, ready to pounce, and he comes in just with a roar into the conversation. And right off the bat, what a jerk. It doesn't take very long at all to get a sense of who Thrasymachus is. Thrasymachus is a self-styled sophist. He's aggressive. He's unnecessarily mean. And let's cut to the chase. Thrasymachus thinks that the whole point of the conversation here is to win. Thrasymachus thinks that he is going to win this debate when he defeats Socrates. Socrates has a very different idea of what the conversation is going to be like. As a matter of fact, right off the bat, Thrasymachus criticizes, that's almost too kind. Chastises, is that too kind? Insults, ridicules, that's the word I'm looking for. Thrasymachus ridicules Polemachus and Socrates, saying like, you guys look like a bunch of idiots. Like a bunch of goofy children. Just like going round and round in circles, and like you come to an agreement, right? Like, oh, we're all going to agree with one another. You guys don't know what you're doing. This is child's play. Socrates, you're doing this thing that everybody knows you do this thing. You ask somebody a question, they give an answer, and then you ask them more questions until you bring them around to agreeing with what you wanted them to say. I ain't falling for that shit. You tell me, Socrates, you tell me what justice is. And I'm not going to let you take some kind of like baloney way out by saying it's the advantageous, or it's the beneficial, or the beautiful, or something like that. Tell me what justice is. And Socrates says, well, first of all, hey, how you doing? Second of all, how are you going to tell me that like you want me to answer this, but then you're going to take away possible answers from me? What if I actually thought that justice was whatever is beneficial? You said I can't say that? What if that's what I believe? You're going to make me say something that I don't believe? True Socratic fashion, he's like, you're going to take that away. Like, I don't know how to answer it. Polemachus and I came to something that we both believe. If you say that's not allowed, then I'll say, you got something better, Thrasymachus? Ooh, there it is. Turns it around. You got something better, Thrasymachus? And Thrasymachus says, yeah, I got something better. What are you going to give me if I show you that my definition of justice is better than yours? What's my reward for this? What am I going to get paid? And Socrates is like, my respect? I don't have any money. There are plenty of other wealthy people here. If you're going to tell us what justice is, then that's a valuable thing. Like we should all be willing to pay you to tell us what justice is. But you'd have to actually give a really good answer. It would have to actually be what justice is. And Thrasymachus says, all right, buckle up, Buttercup, because here it comes. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. And Socrates says, what, you mean like very strong people? Like the guys who fight in the Pancreaton? You know, the Pancreaton was like an ancient Athenian MMA. It was like no rules, except for I think maybe no biting and no kicking people in there. But anything else goes. Pull hair, you could gouge eyes, all kinds of stuff like that. And Socrates says, you mean like the big strong guys, whatever's to their benefit, that's what justice is? So like if it's like eating meat, then like that justice is eating meat, that's like what's to the benefit of all the strong men? And Thrasymachus, and rightly so by the way, says, give me a break, man. You think that's what I got? Stop playing around. If you've been waiting, by the way, for somebody to like put up a serious fight against Socrates, if you were like just getting tired of all these yes men, what a treat we've got for you now.
He said you're nauseating.
What's that?
He said you're nauseating.
Yeah, you're nauseating. Later on, he says something about how like your nose is running and you need a wet nurse to come and wipe your nose for you. Yeah.
I love the part where he's like, I'll shoot you the way people do old women when they're telling stories. Tell you, okay, and now my head are shaking.
Yeah. Is that kind of towards the end after the blush?
I just love that part so much.
Yeah, after the blush, he's just like, yeah, I'll treat you the way that we do old women. When they're talking, I'll just be like, yes, Grandma.
And what is it? And then he continues answering, and Socrates is like, I very admire Professor because the fact that you aren't just nodding and shaking your head, but also answering very beautifully. And he's like, I'm just doing it to humor.
Yeah. We'll get to that. Actually, that's like, once that little turn happens, like nothing of serious interest or consequence happens in the dialogue anymore. And that's actually, and we might wonder, like, why does Plato let it run on for so long? Well, perhaps it's to prove a point. We'll get there. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. So what does he mean by this? Basically, he means might makes right. Whatever the people who have power say that justice is, that's what justice is. Go out looking for justice. That's all you're going to find, just us. There is no real justice. So this is the big, and I think this is a very interesting challenge to the Platonic Socratic approach to these sorts of questions. Thinking about like justice, it's giving people what they're owed, and what is that? Benefits to everybody. And then we talk about our own justice system, and we say, is that what it does? And we go, nope. Not even close. Sometimes it seems like it's not even trying. What's more real? What's the more real justice? Is it the justice that's the ideal, that never happens anywhere? Maybe we get close sometimes. But we never get like absolute, like justice that benefits everybody involved. What's more real? This abstract ideal of justice, or the thing that happens every day and that people call justice? This is maybe relevant to some of the responses, the reflection responses that I've been seeing, where some folks are kind of getting a little frustrated with trying to define these slippery terms like piety and virtue, and they'll say like, God, it's just a word. It's whatever people say it is. Justice can be the same thing then, right? Justice is just whatever people say it is. And who are the people that get to decide what justice is for everybody else? It's the people in power. It's the strongest people. And that's all that justice is. I'm going to track this by talking about lowercase j justice versus, let's call this capital J justice. Where lowercase j justice is, that's maybe the advantage of the stronger. Capital J justice, maybe that's the sort of ideal that never actually happens. If this is the big challenge to Socrates, this is actually a really interesting one. What is more important? The ideal that never happens, or the thing that happens every day that passes for justice? The ideal that never happens? You can join Socrates' camp, I suppose. Anybody want to say, like, nope, it's the thing that happens every day. Like, the ideal, if it never happens, how can we call that real? In fact, what words would we even think of to kind of juxtapose against ideal? Ideal versus real?
I hear a lot of people always talk about, well, that's too idealistic, or we have to be realistic about this.
Yeah.
You're too
That's utopic thinking.
Yeah.
As if it would be horrible to live in a utopia.
Yeah. So I think there is.
That's what we should be aiming for.
There are a lot of people who think of the terms of the real is better than the ideal.
So pay attention then. If this is an attitude that we encounter on a regular basis, or if this is an attitude that's somewhere in the room, that like somebody's just kind of like, I don't want to get torpedo fished here, and say like, I think this is like that's the only justice there is. No bigger justice than that. It's just a word. It's just a word that we use, and it means however we use it. You might have felt that way about piety. That might have been an easier sell. You might have felt that way about virtue even. Justice? Ooh, that's hard. That's hard. Mostly because you want to be able to say, like, if an injustice has been done and everybody gathers around and says, like, that's justice, and the injustice was done to you, you want to be able to say, bullshit, that is unjust. You want to be able to appeal to something more than just what people say. Perhaps. Maybe you're okay with going along with ad populum arguments.
I don't think it's necessarily an either or, but more of a both and. Because I think there's a place for like the capital J justice, even though we might not necessarily be able to get to that ideal on like a, maybe a political level or something, or any sort of institution that's enacting justice.
Sure, and this came up in Steiner's talk.
That other part's still very important. I mean,
Yeah.
you still need the lowercase justice or that ideal to even ever be able to be achieved.
This is what came up in in Steiner's talk. What was it, last week? Last week, yeah, this question about like, yeah, ideal philosophy and like, is it always there? Steiner's conclusion at the very end, if we followed him all the way through it, was that like, no, we do need this, but we had some pushback from others, including Professor Van der Vossen, right? So yeah, maybe there is like, there's a place for one and there's a place for the other. And we could have a question about, like, maybe it's just a contextual difference, right? When we say justice, we might want to check and say, like, whoa, 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 which one do we mean? Lowercase j justice, capital J justice? To get clear on that would be important. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. Might makes right. Socrates says, oh, and by the way, once Thrasymachus has done this, he says, pay me. I did it. That's better than any answer you're going to be able to come up with. And Socrates is like, whoa, that seems like a very impressive answer. Let's take a closer look at it and see what happens. And Thrasymachus says, do your worst. You're not going to be able to harm me here. Socrates says, it seems like you're saying that the people who are in power get to say what justice is, right? That's what you're saying, Thrasymachus? And Thrasymachus is saying, like, yes, you finally understood me, you twit. And Socrates says, what about when the ruler makes a mistake? And here begins a kind of what seems like maybe a detour in the conversation where they're not talking about justice for a little while, they're talking about rulers and the art of ruling. And just to make sure that everybody's on board with this, what I think is a very like small shift. Are we following the why it's relevant?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because what makes a ruler a good ruler? They rule with justice, right? And this is going to depend on like what we mean by justice, right? Thrasymachus seems to be saying whoever's in the position to rule gets to decide what justice is, and Socrates maybe wants to hold out for like some other kind of sense of a ruler. So what about when the ruler makes a mistake? Socrates asks. What about when the ruler makes a rule that is not actually to their benefit, that is not actually to the ruler's advantage? What are the rest of us supposed to do in that circumstance? Either we're going to go against what the ruler has said, in which case it seems like we're going to do an injustice, because the ruler gets to make the rules. That's all that justice is. And also, it seems like they're going to do something that's harmful to the ruler, and I thought justice was the advantage of the stronger. So it looks like it's going to, no matter what they do, if the people comply with a mistaken rule made by a mistaken ruler, if they comply with that rule, they're going to do the unjust thing. If they don't comply with that rule, they're going to not do if they don't comply with that rule, they're going to do the unjust thing. They're kind of caught either way. So what about when the ruler makes a mistake? What do we do then? Yes?
Is it Thrasymachus?
That is how you say
Didn't
it.
he get out of that question by saying we're talking about the precise ruler, one that's not actually
Yep.
true, but
I mean the ruler in the precise sense. And I should point out here that this is the big mistake that Thrasymachus, if we're looking to kind of track back and see where did Thrasymachus get beat by Socrates, that's where it is. All the rest of this is just kind of unfolding it. He gets taken in broad circles. By the end of it, he's saying justice isn't even a good thing, and you'd be a fool to be a just person. Smart and clever people, they're unjust. So, and that ends up being kind of an interesting. We'll get to that in just a second. He says, I mean a ruler in the precise sense. Just a second ago, I was saying what makes this an interesting claim. What's different about this than what Socrates is peddling is that it seems like Thrasymachus is talking about what actually happens, not ideals that never happen. Thrasymachus says, I mean the ruler in the precise sense. After all, if you had a doctor who was harming their patients, they are precisely not a doctor. when they are harming their patients, right? Is that viable? Like, let's say, I think we've been in this territory before. We're going to do it again in Phaedo. But, like, if there was a little hole in the bottom of my water bottle, is it still a water bottle?
Yes.
But it's not holding the water anymore. Is it and forgive the expression, is it a bad water bottle?
Yes.
Insofar as it's got a hole in it and it doesn't hold the water anymore. So we say, like, it's still a water bottle, it's just a bad water bottle. What if the hole gets bigger? What if there's just no bottom to this bottle? It's just not a bottle anymore? All right, so we've got this, there is this kind of like vague boundary between like how bad of an X does something need to be in order to be a non-X, right? And Thrasymachus is drawing a pretty sharp boundary. He says, as soon as the ruler, or anybody else, right? As soon as a doctor stops improving the health of their patients, no longer a doctor, right? That's exactly the moment when they're not a doctor. So we'll say the same thing about a ruler here. A ruler who makes mistakes is no kind of ruler. They're only a ruler when they don't make mistakes. I mean a ruler in the precise sense. And basically what he's done here is he's now crossed back over, and he's in, like, the conversation is now in the territory of the ideal instead of what actually does happen, and that's Socrates' playground. He's toast from here on out. Yeah? If the mistakes in question here are mistakes about what's actually going to be to the advantage of the stronger, what will actually benefit the ruler, right? So, what do you mean here?
I was saying like, little Timmy thinks that a ruler should be physically strong, muscle Hercules man.
Sure.
And little Billy thinks that, he's making a mistake if he has to be strong, he needs to be smart. He needs to be a smart ruler, not necessarily a strong one. And the ruler itself is like neither of those things. So both of the kids think that he's making a mistake, but just in different ways.
Sure, but the ruler's making a mistake in both cases?
That's what I'm saying. It's clearly up to people that see the ruler and kind of come up with these ideas that, he's making a mistake not being strong, or he's making a mistake not being strong. So what does...
I feel like we're in familiar territory here, you and I.
They're curious. These names.
Thrasymachus?
Yeah.
Sure, Thrasymachus. Yeah.
I have the question, like, what is his idea of mistakes? His idea
Well, what we're talking about here is a ruler who gives a rule that they think is to their own advantage, but actually is harmful to the ruler. Now, again, parsing what the difference between things that seem beneficial and actually are harmful, or things that seem beneficial and are actually beneficial, parsing that difference is a very difficult task. They're talking in the abstract here. Socrates says, what about a ruler who makes a mistake? What about it? Like, is this possible? Would you admit that this is possible? A ruler says, here's a rule that I think is going to be to my advantage. Turns out not to be to their advantage. Turns out to harm the ruler. So if you admit that that's a...
to them.
What's that?
I said what's beneficial to them.
What's beneficial for them. Not what seems beneficial to them, but what is beneficial for them. Yeah, sure. Stop by office hours sometime. We'll talk more about this.
Okay.
So what about when a ruler makes a mistake and it seems like the ruled are in a bind there? They can't do other than the unjust thing. And Thrasymachus says, I mean the ruler in the precise sense. Socrates then says, oh, a ruler in the precise sense, huh? Let's talk about the ruler in the precise sense. And he starts a long conversation that plays off of some really provocative analogies between ruling and any other kind of craft or techne. You get these analogies of techne. And Socrates says, ruling is a funny craft in that sense, because every other craft seems to seek the benefit of the weaker. And techne, by the way, that's, sorry, I should define my terms here. Techne is it's a Greek term. It means craft or art. All other crafts seek the benefit of the weaker. Doctors. We just mentioned doctors, right? The doctoring craft. What does it seek to do? Heal people. So there are people who are weaker, right? Who are somehow deficient, and the goal of doctoring, the goal of medicine, is to make those weaker people stronger.
And get money.
We'll get to making money in just a second. Horse training. In horse training, the goal of the techne of horse training is to find the weak horse and make it stronger, right? To confer all the benefits of the techne to that horse. If we want to talk about pottery, there's a quote-unquote weak piece of unshaped clay, and we make it stronger by giving it form. Every techne seeks the benefit of something else and not itself. Pottery doesn't get better when a potter makes a pot. Medicine doesn't get better when a doctor heals a patient. The patient gets better. Every other techne seeks the benefit of some other thing that is deficient and weaker and needs to be stronger. But ruling apparently is different, and this is where Thrasymachus says, Socrates, you got a runny nose. You need a wet nurse to come and wipe it for you. You little brat. You miserable tit. Just never misses a chance to toss in an insult there. Apparently nobody ever told you about shepherds and sheep. You think the shepherds are seeking the benefit of the sheep? Shepherds are going to kill the sheep and eat it. Shepherds seek their own benefit. Doctors want money. This is why you're a doctor. You're a doctor, but what, to heal patients? Doctor to make money. And Socrates says, really? Is wage earning essential to the techne? If you heal people but you don't make any money off of it, are you a doctor? Are you any less of a doctor if you do it for free? If you make money and wear a white lab coat and call yourself Dr. Rosenfeld, MD, but you make all of your patients sicker, are you a doctor? You get fired. What if you didn't get fired? What if you got away with it? Would you be a doctor?
Yeah, you still have the MD.
Would you be a doctor in the precise sense?
No.
You might pass for a doctor. People might call you a doctor. But would you be a doctor in the precise sense? I don't think so. Wage earning seems to be incidental to any craft. That's not what makes you a potter, is that you make money. What makes you a potter is that you make pots. What makes you a doctor is that you heal people. What makes you a horse trainer is that you train horses, not that you make money from it. Is what makes you a shepherd that the sheep go to slaughter? Or is what makes you a shepherd that you care for the sheep? This is an interesting analogy, too, because shepherds and sheep, this is actually a really provocative one for the ruler and the ruled, right? It's the ruler ruling the ruled. Is the ruler caring for the ruled so that they can fatten them up and eat them later?
Yes.
A ruler in the precise sense?
Oh.
Or is a ruler caring for the people? And we can think of it you want theological analogies? God has dominion over man and rules man. Is this what is God's fattening us up for the slaughter? To exploit us? That doesn't seem like that's certainly not the shepherd-sheep analogies that are strewn all over the Bible, unless that would be a very different way to read the Bible, right? When we talk about man's dominion over the natural world in Genesis 1:26, is that dominion, is it like a shepherd to the sheep? In the sense that we can exploit the sheep for our own benefit, or that we're supposed to be caretakers. What is the purpose of saying man has, or humans have dominion over all of the animals and the rest of nature? Is it to exploit it for needs, or is it to be a caretaker and to seek its benefit, like every other technique? Yes, in the back. Sure, then we might wonder, like, yeah, so is the essence of shepherding, is it about getting the wool? If you don't get the wool, you're not a shepherd. You're taking care of the sheep. Are you doing it for some benefit to yourself, or are you doing it for the benefit of the sheep? Or what, and in fact, like we might talk about like what do shepherds actually do? We might also talk about like what is the essence of shepherding? If a shepherd never sheared their sheep, never got any wool from them, never got any mutton from them, just took care of the sheep into a ripe old sheep age, would they still be a shepherd?
Yeah.
Or would we say like, if you're not making money, you're not getting wool, not getting mutton, it ain't real shepherding? This seems to suggest that the essence of the art is the caring for the weaker, right? Caring for the thing that needs your help. And all of the wage earning and stuff that comes along, all those benefits that come along for the ride, those are accidental, incidental. Yes? I don't eat my dog, that's right. Wait, what was that part? I do. I take care of it. Yes. Yeah, perhaps I'm a dog herd, right? Instead of a shepherd. Yeah.
You get something from the dog. Like
Sure, I
emotional
get benefits from it. This is all right. So this is what's going to come up next, right? How are we doing on time? Oh my
5 minutes.
good golly!
Protect you.
Not going to make this in one day.
I just, no, too happy. You're too, this
Yeah,
Seeing as we have, 5 minutes?
Yeah, we have 5 minutes and there's plenty to do. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. We really need the extra day. So I'm just going to skip over a whole bunch of stuff, including a very surprising claim that Thrasymachus makes where he says injustice is actually better and superior to justice. And Socrates is like, whoa, this is a really like killer moment. If you've ever spent a whole lot of time in a discussion / argument with somebody who you disagree with, you might notice that sometimes what happens is you get them to like come around. You kind of like make a good argument and they're like, oh yeah, I say, okay, yeah, I changed my mind. That doesn't happen all that often. Sometimes what happens is you realize you're just using words differently and there wasn't a real disagreement ever. It was just like people talking past one another. Sometimes what you find is you either back them up or you realize that like they actually hold a really surprising position, such as justice is worse than injustice. And this is where Socrates like finds Thrasymachus. And it's not clear if Thrasymachus wants to be there or if he's just like still desperately trying to win the argument, so we'll say whatever he needs to in order to not admit that he's beaten. Basically what this comes down to is this idea that justice is for suckers. And Socrates offers an argument against Thrasymachus that ends with Thrasymachus blushing and realizing that he's beaten. And from then on in the rest of the dialogue, he's just a yes man, right? He's just like, I'm just going to, whatever you want, Socrates. And when it's all done, Socrates is like, all right, so you agree with me. And Thrasymachus is like, what? Have you ever had somebody like this? Where they just like, maybe you're playing a game with them and they realize they're beaten and they just stop trying to save a little bit of face? That way when they lose, they weren't really beaten. So this is what Thrasymachus does at the end of Book 1. Glaucon and Adeimantus, though, swoop in and say, Socrates, I think Thrasymachus gave up a little too easy.
This argument was a good one.
Yeah, he had a really interesting point there, this idea that justice is for suckers. For the record, we don't believe this. We think justice is a good thing, but he said something that got us thinking, and we think this is a point that really needs to be explored. We think you rushed through the argument. We think this really seriously needs to be defended. So tell us this, Socrates. Do you think justice is good for its own sake, or do you think it's merely good for its consequences? Or perhaps do you think it's both?
He offers like the three definitions of three types of like justice, I guess.
Yeah. Justice, good for its own sake, or for its consequences? Or both. And Socrates says, I think it's both. And Glaucon and Adeimantus say, that's what we thought you were going to say. I don't see how that can be. And Glaucon lays out this story, the myth of Gyges. Have you heard the myth of Gyges before?
Yeah.
Myth of Gyges is it's a story, like we've heard many, many iterations of the myth of Gyges. It plays on a classic mythological trope. There's a magic ring, and when you put it on and kind of turn it the right way, it makes you turn invisible. Have you heard stories like this? Magic rings that make you invisible? Right. So the interesting thing about a magic ring that makes you invisible, or any power of invisibility, is that it seems to kind of be naturally corruptive. Try this out next time you're at a cocktail party, or next time you're on a blind date with somebody. Ask them whether they'd like to have the superpower of flight or the superpower of invisibility. If they say invisibility, do not trust this person. There's nothing honest you can do with the power of invisibility. It is seemingly inherently corrupting. And this is exactly what happens to Gyges. He uses his power of invisibility to do all kinds of dirty deeds. Oh, we're not done yet. I still have 1 minute. All kinds of dirty deeds. Done dirt cheap. And he gets away with them. He gets away with everything. Gyges manages, through this magic ring, to be the most unjust person in the kingdom by a long shot, and gets away with everything so that everybody thinks he's the most just person. He gets all of the benefits of injustice and also gets all of the benefits of seeming just. And meanwhile, there's some other sucker, the just sucker, who gets framed for all of Gyges' dirty deeds, and everybody thinks that he's a terrible person. And he's not in it for the recognition, so he's never like, it wasn't me. He just does the right. You know these people who they do the right thing, but they don't brag about it. They don't try to broadcast it. They think that doing the right thing is its own reward. Mm-hmm. So there's that person who seems the most unjust, but is in fact the most just. And then there's this other person over here, Gyges, who is the most unjust and seems the most just. And Glaucon and Adeimantus say, who would you rather be, Socrates? Because I think I know what almost everybody else would say. What would you say? Who would you rather be? Gyges or the just sucker? Maybe I'm loading the deck there a little bit by saying the just sucker. Rather be Gyges?
Just sucker. I mean, you would feel bad.
Rather be the just sucker? You'd feel bad?
Yeah.
Not if you just had no conscience.
Yeah, that's true.
If you could do injustice and not feel even a little bit bad about it, you wouldn't even feel guilty. We're talking now about injustice in the precise sense, right? Full tilt injustice. You are awesome at it. You are so good at injustice that you never get caught and you never even feel bad about it. That's as unjust as it gets, right?
Yeah.
We'll pick this up just a scooch, just a little bit on Thursday, and then we'll get into apology and credo.